And so Shemini, of course, deals with a lot of the Levitical laws, laws pertaining to purity. And so every time I bring up subject matters like purity or personal observance or being from or anything like that, I say to myself, well, I'm coming at it from an angle of humility. So I'm not necessarily perfect at all that I do. I tend to be very bad at prayer, for example. You know, I'm one of these people that I'm a very bad prayer warrior. Sometimes I daven, but sometimes I forget, and then it's too late. It's not the right time of day. And then when I do, I just kind of feel like, I'm much better at study. Some people hate studying and love praying, but, everybody has their own deficiencies. And so I'm bringing up this subject of kosher to my sensei in martial arts. He has this way of sort of knocking you down a couple pegs so that he can build you back up. So I'm going to strip you so that I can hand you royal purples. Okay? So it's kind of like in the Kung Fu movies where the student climbs the mountain and at the very top is the Zen master, the monk, who's the greatest martial artist ever. And then he gets to the very top and he challenges the sensei to a duel. I want you to teach me. And so the sensei says, show me what you got. And he's doing all these flying crane kicks and everything. And the sensei is just kind of like eating a donut and blocking him, and just effortlessly. And finally he puts him in a clinch, and this is in Kill Bill Volume 1 or 2 or something like that. He puts him in a clinch and it's really painful. The sensei finally, he's had enough. And the student screams in pain, howls in pain, and says, "There's nothing I can do to stop you. I'm completely helpless in your grasp." And then the sensei says, "This is the beginning." And so, what is it? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So it's kind of like you got to get shocked and knocked down a peg. And so, this is to point you in the right direction if you guys are curious about this kind of thing. So the title of this is MJ's Kinda Keep Kosher. But it's not as hard as you think, and maybe you should really consider exploring it for yourself. So, there you go. It's set in humility. So, what are the Levitical kashrus laws? Like, if you were to explain it to somebody outside of Judaism, what would be your shtick? How would you go about it? What's your elevator speech on kashrus? Anybody? What's your elevator speech on kashrus? How would you explain what it actually is? Okay.
Certain animals are good to eat, and other animals are not permissible to eat, and preparation also matters in certain regards.
Okay, but why?
Because Hashem in the Torah gave us kashrut to make a distinction between holy and common, between Israel and the nations.
David?
I also think that the kosher animals are designed more to be food than some of the unkosher animals. I think there are actually health reasons.
Okay, all right. Okay. So I'm actually with, all good answers, but I'm going to say this. I come from the school of thought, and we all respectfully disagree, but I think Mormons tend to be very long-lived, and Seventh-day Adventists all live to be like 90 because they eat vegetables all the time. All these different groups tend to look at the kashrus laws, and I think that there was a gentleman by the name of John Harvey Kellogg. He's the guy that made Frosted Flakes, and he was involved in. They had a movie with Anthony Hopkins called The Road to Wellville. It was actually kind of funny. But a lot of American Protestants probably looked at the kashrus laws and said that this is a sanitation code, or this is, God wants you to lower your cholesterol. God wants you to have, decent blood pressure or whatever. But I would come against you and say that the health ministry ideal is disprovable. So, which is kosher versus which is healthy? This is a little game we're going to play. Fresh greens served on a porous and defiled plate. Maybe there was a cutting board that had pork on it in the past. Right? A wooden cutting board that's porous. Versus beer and hechshered roast brisket on a new plate that's textured. It's got a stand. One of those is healthy for you. One of those is kosher. So, I'm going to bring this a little bit further. This is, if you look at other nations throughout the world, for example, if you look at Hinduism, they have different dietary codes. The Brahmins. Hinduism is an ancient religion. I mean, Hinduism, the Indus River Valley civilization is one of the oldest on the planet. They have the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas and the Dalits, and they all have their diets respective to their castes. I believe I read about a group of whale hunters in the Pacific Northwest. They would hunt whales. They'd spear whales. And the hunter who went out on the canoe and speared the whale was considered unclean for 3 or 4 days, and he'd have to hang out in his own particular wigwam. Even though he washed up, he still was polluted somehow. And so this is Herodotus talking about the Egyptian priesthood. But also they receive many benefits. They do not consume or spend anything of their own. Sacred food is cooked for them. Beef and goose are brought to them in great abundance to each man every day, and wine grapes are given to them too. They may not eat fish. The Egyptians sow no beans in their country. If they grow, they will not eat them, raw or cooked. The priests cannot endure even to see them. Let's see. Let's see. And there's another one. This is Herodotus in the Histories. And here's an interesting one from Herodotus in the Histories. The males of the ox kind they consider to belong to Epaphos, their god. And on account of him, they test them in the following manner. If the priest sees one single black hair upon the beast, he counts it unclean for sacrifice. Oh, you've heard that before somewhere, haven't you? So ancient religions have their sacred diets, and they have nothing to do with longevity, cholesterol, health, blood pressure. That is a modern scientific retrojection onto the text to make sense of it. In truth, it's kind of, an arbitrary system that works because God says it does. We don't know why the pork, we don't know why the pig, we don't know why the chicken, God picked this or that. And so a person might ask, well, this is easy, Drake. All I have to do is, at the restaurant, I can hold the ham and shrimp and I'm good, right? That's all kosher really is, right? I can just buy a chicken or beef at Kroger and it's fine, right? But if you go to, verily I say unto you, and I live this way too. I keep kosher light. I go out to restaurants and I have fish and I have eggs and dairy. I don't eat meat. But I know that on a fundamental level, if there's a big range in which something was being cooked, right, and they had shrimp on there in the past, and I'm ordering some kind of maybe like vegetable stir fry, it's technically still it's still treif, So I am not keeping 100% biblical kosher. I mean, God says in Leviticus and Vayikra about the surfaces, So this is a measure of attitude. Like, so why does Messianic Judaism keep kashrus, and why do we think it's important? I mean, the law came and it was done away with by Jesus and all that stuff. So what's the deal? This is open, by the way. You can contribute. Yes.
It seems like that, at least in Acts 15, there's a level of kashrus that the Jerusalem Council required even for Gentiles that seemed to be above a regular God-fearer at the time, so to speak. So there's some level of kashrus there that was higher, seemingly. I know sometimes it's debated, but that's one thing.
There's a lot of commandments that aren't in there, so that might have just been a starting point,
right.
a launching point. The Didache talks about it, Revelation chapter 2. Jezebel is offering her food of idolatry, Revelation 2. Anybody else have anything you'd like to contribute? Go ahead, Sam.
First, we'd have to debunk that Jesus did away with the Torah.
Yeah.
First, that would have to be settled in order to take it to the next.
Well, that's a whole nother. That's its own lesson. Now, if you weren't raised in a frum household, that is to say, an observant household, how many of us really kind of feel overwhelmed by this? Let's be honest. Like, where do you know to begin? How do you This is a lot. Like, to understand the whole entire Levitical and kashrus system as it was developed, not just in the Torah, but carried through the Dark Ages and the Renaissance and all those time periods in Europe by the rabbis. How many of you look at this and say, holy cow, I know you're not supposed to eat shrimp and pork, but I know there's a lot more out there. How many you feel actually overwhelmed? Oh, shame. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'm trying my best with this to kind of bring it down to earth. And there's another question, like, what should MJ kashrus observance actually be? You know, do we agree with conventional rabbinic Judaism on everything? I mean, like, let's say the kitniot, for example, during Passover, not eating beans. Go ahead.
Because I grew up in a kosher household.
Yeah.
And it's actually not hard. It's just not.
It's not hard.
Everyone, not everyone, but most people probably have more than one set of dishes. Because you
Yeah.
do. So you just, instead of just using them all the time, in this cabinet is the meat dishes, in this cabinet is the dairy dishes. And you just buy from certain places and not from other places, and you don't mix. So it really isn't hard at all. But I had a question about the way, I mean, and also the kosher butchers and all that. Like today, though, in the Orthodox, and even before, it has to be slaughtered in a certain way by a certain person. The butcher himself has to live an observant life, and that has to be done, or it's not kosher. To them, it's not kosher at all. But in the Torah, does it talk about that at all? I thought it was just the clean and the unclean. I didn't
At a particular
about how it's slaughtered or anything like that.
in Leviticus, well, there's the example of Noah, for example. God says to Noah, "Drain the blood out of the animal, for the nefesh is in the animal and it belongs to me." So as long as there's an altar of God in the world, you're saying something that is in that animal belongs to God isn't yours, if that makes sense. Two.
4,000 times.
Yeah, I have a funny anecdote about that. I was going to Toko Hills one particular Pesach, and I was getting the second cut of brisket because it's the cheaper cut, and it was Passover's coming up, and I make this rosemary brisket. I put wine in it. It's kind of like a beef bourguignon. It's really yummy. And this old Jewish grandma comes up to me. She sidles up to me, completely unbidden, and she says to me, "Now, what I do," and she's from Brooklyn or something. She goes, "What I do is I boil it." Yeah, and I looked at her and she says, "Yeah, I know. Everybody at shul says that I shouldn't boil it, but I boil it." But no, it's and I was like, everybody at shul's kind of right. And I don't know if your meat is leather, then we can't be friends anymore. I'm just kidding. It's an abomination to God, leather meat, and So no, it's not hard. I mean, like before Luna came into my life and before I was married, I did have separate dishes, and I did shop at certain places. I've had to make certain allowances, but it's something that is easier. So like, I had these buckets that I would use at the sink because the sink is kind of a hotbed of treif, for example, and that's something that people do. So another question, a tough question, and we've had Orthodox Jews pay us a visit. Do we have anything to offer them for oneg? No. So again, this is about the humbling. It's not meant to break you down and make you feel despair. It's just about to let's get an accurate assessment of where we are, and you can grow if you know first where you're at. So this is a funny little note that this is from MJRC's website. The first mitzvah in Eden was a kosher law. Don't eat that. I'm serious. Don't eat that. That's technically a kosher law. It is kosher for me to eat, but it's not kosher for you to eat. Why? Because I said so. The same anxiety. There's not really an answer given. There's not really that same anxiety is even there. You gave this hook, this inexplicable law. So I would say so. We ask, why did Hashem even pick such a system? I could take the easy way out that I said earlier, is that he selected laws because it's an arbitrary system and it works because he says it does. And that might be an answer. Nevertheless, I think that there are certain animals, objects, acts that were probably associated with death more than others, and therefore they couldn't be brought into the presence of the name. So like today, for example, somebody might say, whether you could eat a raw steak or a raw pork chop, and you have because of modern agricultural and slaughter methods and what we know about antibiotics and what we know about the sciences, if you were to eat a raw pork chop, I think there's like a 0.4% chance of you getting like a trichinosis worm or something. It's not very high, is my point. So somebody might say, so if you're basing it on health, it quickly erodes. And kashrus is also totemic. That's kind of like an anthropological term to say that it serves to distinguish one group of people from another. So we keep this and they don't keep that, and therefore it's a marker that says that, we eat this, they eat that, and it keeps us from mingling and assimilating too much. And so I also admonish you to reject despair. Even though this seems like a lot, as you yourself said, it's not like a huge... If you take things one step at a time, I remember when you first began Messianic Judaism, you probably didn't do everything all at once. You probably started doing it in steps and phases. And so, just be humble about it and know that, God loves you. It's like, imagine you get adopted into a household. And the head of the household, the father, says, the rule of this household, he says to the kids, is we clear the table every night, right? And so this adopted kid says, well, if I don't clear the table one night, I won't be adopted anymore. It's like, no, that's not true. So misreading Paul, many Christians might be tempted to think that if you fail in any aspect of Torah, then you're wasting your time trying to do any of it. But Torah was never like an all or nothing proposition, is my point. And observance must not become a point of division. Those who keep a higher level they're to be commended, and those who don't keep a higher level, they're to be welcomed unconditionally. That's my take. Okay. Wherever you are, God loves you. And actually, kashrus unobservance is considered one of the least of the commandments, compared to being kind and compared to all these, praying and all these other things. So it's considerably minor. So if you eat a piece of bacon, it's not as bad as obviously if you gossiped about somebody or did something like that, or just you had money and you just kind of walked past a homeless person when you felt called to give that person money. But ultimately it comes down to this right here. Be holy, for I am holy. Leviticus 21:8. So, indicting a ham sandwich. There's an old saying, and this is from Solomon Watchler. He was an American attorney in New York, and he was noted for saying that you can indict anybody. You can indict a ham sandwich. And so, I'm going to give you a simple, I guess, an exercise, a story, an anecdote. Let's say you have two individuals. You have one person who is, he's Jewish, but he's kind of like, not really, I mean, he's Jewish, but he's not observant, he's not really into it, so to speak, and you catch him and he's eating this ham sandwich. And he says to you, as he's munching on the ham sandwich, I know I shouldn't, I guess I'm being a bad Jew, ha ha ha, and he jokes about it, and that's the end of it. But then you come to, let's say, somebody in, let's say, Messianic Judaism, and he's eating a cheeseburger. Now, there's nothing in the Torah specifically about cheeseburgers, but when you call him on it and say, look, you're eating a cheeseburger, he gets really defensive and he says, well, that's all just the extrapolation of the rabbis, and I'm not answerable to them. It's me and my Bible, and nobody can come between me and my Bible, and there's nobody above me and my Bible, and it's just me and God and my Bible, and all these authorities and groups and committees, and even though God appointed them, he has nothing to do with it, because it's just me, and I kind of go around and see. I do what I see fit in my own eyes, as it says in the book of Judges. I do what I see fit in my own eyes. I'm not answerable to a committee. I'm not answerable to elders. I'm not answerable to expertise that came before me. So there's a Jew who's eating a ham sandwich and saying, I know I really shouldn't. I guess I'm being a bad Jew. And then you have a Hebrew roots guy who's eating the cheeseburger, which is technically not in the Torah one way or another. And he's saying that he is his own rabbi. Who is more teachable? The first. So it's kind of like the metaphor of the tax collector and the Pharisee. They go before the Hashem, and one is like, yes, I'm a rotten sinner. I know I shouldn't be eating this ham sandwich. And the other is like, I am the axis of everything, and I am the measure, and my relationship with the Spirit tells me everything, and I can hear nothing from you, and I will receive no advice. Bound up in this conversation is a lot of proper versus improper attitude, if that makes sense. So it's not saying don't observe, but if one of those individuals is to actually go on a fruitful spiritual journey, it's going to be the first guy, if that makes sense. So that's the indicted ham sandwich. So I'm going to go over with you just the fundamentals of kashrus, because I think, we have people new who are tuning in, and we have, I guess, newer faces here. I mean, I've been here for like a decade. And so I just thought I'd go over this, and it might be just beating a dead horse, which would be unkosher. It's not a split hoof animal. I would be tuma, I would have to immerse. And I'm going to go through kosher animals, ritual slaughter, idolatrous meat offerings, meat and dairy separation, agricultural products, pure vessels, Passover, kashrus, yayin, nesach, shared wine, and heksher. And so, buckle up.
How many weeks is this going to take?
No, what?
How many weeks are you
Oh no, this is going to be fast. This will be a thunder run. This will be a thunder run. And so, basically kosher animals. And if you find any grammatical mistakes, I wrote all this at like 12 and 1 o'clock in the morning. I had no time throughout the week, and I had to kind of prep for this kind of on the fly. So if you find any grammatical mistakes, I wrote this in zombie mode. Meat. The Torah states that kosher animals that chew their cud are ruminants and are cloven hoofed. This includes sheep, cow, goat, deer, antelope, bison, gazelle, and ibex. That's Vayikra. The Torah offers no specific characteristics to distinguish permitted and forbidden fowl. Instead, it enumerates 24 forbidden species. And in the United States, the only poultry accepted in mainstream kashrus is considered chicken, turkey, goose, I put good, goose, and duck. 2 criteria exist for kosher seafood. It has to have fins and scales. And between conservative and orthodoxy, there's somewhat of a debate between what counts as a scale, because some fish, like sturgeon, have kind of these bony spines. We don't really know. Locusts are actually permitted. There's 4 species of locusts in Vayikra that are permitted. And I think it's perhaps a concession to what happens when locusts actually arrive. They devastate your crops. My crops are devastated, but then thousands of pounds of protein have landed on my field. And so it's like, well, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. And so you might as well let them. The sages did say, I think, that it was probably a concession for crop devastation. So, Bereshis 9:4, God says to Noach, "But you shall not eat the flesh with its life, that is the blood." And so Devarim says that sheep and cattle should be slaughtered as I have instructed you. Now, nowhere, he doesn't really go too deep into the Torah. God never says what the slaughtering process is to look like. And so the sages say, as I have instructed you, means that there was something orally that was passed down at Sinai that describes this. And so you have a shochet, he's a ritual butcher, and he takes this, I've seen some of these blades, they look almost like a sword. And it can't have, he runs his finger across it to make sure that there are no skips, no notches in the blade, make sure that it's a clean cut. And you have to be able to do it in one stroke. And you have to do it without cutting the windpipe, because if it cuts the windpipe, then blood will pour into the windpipe, and the thing will gag and die a very... So that's one of the reasons why halal is actually considered unkosher, is because they cut the windpipe. So they actually consider halal, the sages consider halal monotheistic. So it's not food of idolatry, but they say that they slash the windpipe and it backs up, the blood backs up into the animal and it'll gag and suffer, making it treif. And so he practices shechita, the slitting the throat of the animal as per Torah. So after butchering, the meat is washed of all obvious blood, soaked for about a half an hour, salted to draw out blood for an hour, and then it's rinsed with the salt 3 times. Yeah, you're familiar with this process. Yeah.
Kosher butcher all the way.
What?
Kosher butchers all the way.
Yes, exactly. They know what they're doing. And I think I've heard it said that they also put the meat on an incline so that it kind of drains out of the blood as well at some point. So, and so food sacrificed to idols. And you'd mentioned earlier, good call, Derek. The Jerusalem Council says, that food sacrificed to idols are debarred to Gentiles. And in Revelation 2:20, it describes a Jezebel leading the assembly of Thyatira astray by plying them with sacrificial food of idolatry. And so you should, and it says in Exodus, you should forge no treaty with the locals, then stray after their idols, slaughter to those idols, and be invited by them to eat from such offerings. So the Torah is pretty clear. And Revelation, even the very end book of the Bible, kind of points out, don't. Because just like if you were going to the Catholic Church and you were going to split the wafer and have the blood and have the wafer, you're having a communion with God. It would be seen as though you're having a communion with their gods. That was considered a no-no. And so one who keeps kosher light might reconsider dining at certain, perhaps, Indian restaurants. Does the owner bless his kitchen to his God? Sometimes I've known that they sprinkle their kitchen with cow's milk and will bless their kitchen to their God. Then again, however, some statues are used as decorations. Who is to know? Jewish and Gentile monotheists probably shouldn't be attending certain holidays like the Hindu day of Diwali. I have friends that in the office that go and do that. And I think they're kind of, they might be nice people, but they might be Christians just acting politely, but that's not what we're called to do. We're on Team Abraham, right? Team Abraham. Not those other gods, not Krishna.
Team Yeshua.
Yeah, exactly. At where I'm at right now in life, I'm kind of pesca-vegetarian when I'm out, if that makes sense. I have to eat out when I'm with my coworkers and whatnot, so I do what I can. So meat and dairy separation. This is the one that everybody feels like the need to show me. Where in the Torah? So what actually clinched it for me, I used to be of that camp years ago. Back, you take on Messianic Judaism for the first time. You're sort of in that honeymoon militancy, and you see that rabbis just don't know what they're talking about, and it's just you and your Bible and all that stuff. So what struck me is that in ancient religions in Mesopotamia, the Indus River Valley, Canaan, ancient cultures brought cheese and meat sacrifices all the time to their temples. That was a luxury. That was a finery, and that was something that you would present to your gods, and you would want to be. That's something that gods would want. That's a desideratum, so to speak. Use a Latin term. And if you look at Leviticus and look at the entire sacrificial system of the Torah, there isn't a dairy offering mentioned once. And so it's not so much what the Torah says, it's in the vacuum, in the sea of paganism where all this is being done, it's what it's not saying. And that kind of struck me. I was like, whoa. Every single Mesopotamian religion has dairy sacrifices. So the goddess Inanna married Tammuz, for example. He was a shepherd deity. And because of this, she always received milk and cheese offerings at her temple. So that's the case in point. But one of the things we notice is that there is you can't kill a mother and a calf on the same day. You can't kill a bird and its eggs in the same nest. You can't boil a goat in its mother's milk. You cannot offer life where there is blood during intimacy. Lavan, his name, Lavan, means white, and Edom means red. So Yaakov is fleeing from red and going to white. It's almost like a scapegoat, metaphor there. And the scapegoat goes from red to white. So every time the Bible sees life and death or red and white together, it always does like this. It kind of pulls them apart. So in Devarim it says, you can't put a stumbling block in front of a blind man, I think is the mitzvah. Well, does that mean you can put a stumbling block in front of a seeing man? Or a deaf man? Or a child? Also, this law that is given is serving as an example of many ways of not to do something. So when God is saying, don't boil a kid in his mother's milk, is he saying that just don't boil a kid in his mother's milk? Or is he saying, don't combine life and death because I never do anywhere else in my liturgical system? So I think that kind of put the nail in the coffin of, I'm at liberty to eat cheeseburgers. You can have cheeseburgers, but just don't say it's kosher. It's a free country. We have freedom of association. The tithed harvest, Maser and Teruma. So all produce should be free of insects. That's why you sometimes see Orthodox people with magnifying glasses inspecting their fruit. For produce exported from Eretz Israel, the food must have been tithed to be fit for consumption. Untithed food is called tevel. and it's forbidden. In my research, many Jews seem to be uncertain about the tithe status of fruits and vegetables, and Jewish authorities struggle oftentimes to clarify and track exports. So the laws of Maser and Teruma are suspended during the Shemitah year, which is tracked. This requirement is satisfied by discarding a small portion and reciting a formula. So kind of like what you do with the challah, in a way. So if you want more details and explanations, that's on the OU Kosher website. They'll tell you how to do that. You have your produce, you take a portion of the way, kind of like the challah, and you recite a certain formula. And if you're in doubt about whether or not it's actually been tithed. And then there's the fruit harvest, the orla. It means literally uncircumcised with regards to the fruit. So the first 3 years, the harvest is forbidden. The 4th year is holy, and it's to be eaten in Jerusalem. And the 5th year is common, and you can enjoy it freely. And so, again, tracking certified foods is very difficult. And so different Jewish communities tend to take a certain level of leniency with regards to this, because it's like, well, Monsanto isn't necessarily going to concern itself with Leviticus, or, so they're not going to necessarily track that for you. And so there also exists a dispute on whether or not the Orla laws apply in the same across the world or only within the land of Israel. Orla laws are nevertheless much more stringent in Israel. Talmud Kiddushin takes a very hard stance. It says that if you disobey the Orla laws in the diaspora, you are going to be childless, and all these other things. And then Mishnah Orla 3:9 states that outside the land it's permitted when in doubt. So, pure vessels. So in Leviticus it says that if something comes into contact with liquid or anything impure or anything like that, you have a vessel, a kli, that it's made of clay, it's porous, that it's simply to be shattered and buried. And then when then Eleazar the priest said to the soldiers who had gone into battle, this is after I think their little scuffle with Midian in the desert, this is what is required by the law that the Lord gave to Moses. Gold, silver, bronze, iron, tin, lead, and anything else that can withstand fire must be put through the fire, and it will be clean. But it must also be purified with water after the cleansing. And what cannot withstand fire must be put through water. That's in Bamidbar 31:21. So you have to consider the history of your plates and your crockery if you want to keep actual kosher. And so just a quick rundown of this. Different rabbinic authorities and kosher authorities have made different rulings on the status of enamel. Some say that if it's porous clay, then you have to destroy it if it comes in contact. But if it's cold, if the contact was cold, it wasn't warm, and it's with an enamel surface, it's protected, then it's not porous and it hasn't absorbed anything. But again, consult your local rabbi. Now, if you have a pan and something unclean comes in contact with it, and it's basically a cold contact, you can wash it off with soap and water, it's fine. But if, for example, you were boiling a stew and it's a water-based stew, which most stews are, and I don't know, a roach falls in it, or whatever, you'd obviously throw it out because you don't want to eat that. But you would have to boil it in hot water. You'd have to boil it in a process called hagalah. And then if it was a grease-based, which tends to infuse metal more, grease tends to infuse metal more with certain forbidden savors, you would use something called labun gamur, which would be capturing it until it's red hot using a blowtorch or fire. And then it's based upon the principle of the tokbo kevaroz. As it was infused, so it will be purged. And then, of course, there's the process of tobbling. Tobbling is basically saying, well, I've cleaned all the forbidden savors, but now I'm going to sanctify it. And that's when you immerse it in a mikveh, a river, or something of that nature, and that's when you sanctify it. Essentially, now it's no longer treif, but now I'm going to sanctify it, and now your crockery is good to go. So here's some pictures of Orthodox. They're doing hagalah, boiling their utensils, in a big drum. And of course, this is libun gamur. He's using a blowtorch at Passover to make sure that none of those little chametz particles are in the corners of such and such. It might be a pizzeria, I don't know.
He's actually using a blowtorch on the grill.
Yeah, they'll take the whole oven during Passover, like if there was a pizza.
Stay away from that guy.
The plastic knob.
Gas flame, really flame through it.
You have to think about that, yeah. And so that's something you have to be really mindful of, and so that's the process of libun gamur. Yeah, it does look pretty. This is very intense. So kitniot, some class of foods that might be that many Ashkenazim and some Sephardim avoid eating on Passover. That's kitniot, since they can be conflated with standard chametz products. This prohibition includes legumes, beans, rice, and corn. And so pickled items and soy sauce tend to use malt. Wheat is used as a cheap filler in everything, so you really have to be careful. And so it's just saying that I'm just throwing out my bread is not technically getting rid of your chametz. If you have pickles and they use wheat malt to ferment that, then you got to kind of redo your inventory. So in 2018, the MJRC, that's who we're associated with. They revised their position on kitniot. They said that after Ashkenazi normative practice has historically included the minchag to avoid the halakha category of foods referred to as kitniot, MJRC does not regard this minhag to be an authoritative norm for contemporary practice, but as a custom for whose observance is a matter of communal and individual discretion. So we've lightened that a little bit, but some years I've kept it depending on my mood. If I'm feeling very holy, okay.
As he takes a drink of wine.
So, Yayin Nesek versus shared wine. Now, the laws of Yayin Nesek, spoken of in Shulchan Aruch Yoredeya 123.3, talk about this, that wine was a universal of the set table in the Middle East, as well as for the altars of the gods that were all throughout the Middle East. The Canaanite gods versus the Egyptian gods versus the our God. And wine is a universal. Gods like wine, fancy that. The Olympians, the nectar of the gods, right? And so it's considered a good offering. But there was a fear of wine of idolatry that Jews had throughout the ages. Can we drink wine with these Gentiles if they're, if I open a jug of wine, if I uncork a jug of wine, and I start drinking with these Gentiles, and then when I step out to go to the restroom or something and come back, will he have tipped it over in designation to Zeus or something, and now I'm drinking wine of Avodah Zarah? And so they came up with a solution. So they begin this process. I go back to the lady who says, "I boil it." That's what mavushal is. So back in the which it's designed to debase the wine to such a degree that no deity would consider it fit for altar consumption, and it sort of neutralizes it into sort of non-wine, if you will, and that way you can drink wine with your Hindu friends and everything's okay. That's mavushal wine. Even their gods won't want it. Is the rationale. No, it's also another barrier to, like, I don't want to assimilate in by drinking wine and intermarrying with other people, and so non-mavushal wine is kosher as well. It has to be kosher certified. So you can have kosher wine breaks out into two parts: mavushal and non-mavushal. Now today, in the modern era, they tend to do mavushal in a much more sensitive way. You know how in pasteurization they shoot milk through like a jet really fast, like in a second, and they flash it? That's the same way. And so it's not as intense and it doesn't destroy the caliber of the wine. You can still get a decent flavor. I mean, heat and light are kind of the enemies of wine. Now other considerations are, when it comes to wine, are brought to bear too. Were the grapes tithed, and where was their orla? But wines tend to be very old, so that's sometimes not necessary. I mean, it's necessary if you care about this sort of thing. Yeah. So, does the Torah permit wine? Yes. The Torah allows wine. They weren't drinking grape juice in the Bible. That's a silly little myth. So, does that make sense though? Mavushal versus non-mavushal. Non-mavushal is going to taste better, but go ahead.
So I learned
realized when I saw something that said wine that's vegan, when I wound up going down the path of being vegan, and I was like, why would it not be vegan? And so then I realized they filter it through a fish bladder.
Oh my goodness.
Often.
Yeah.
And beer as well. So that's the difference, and it's not always a kosher fish.
So I could give you an example of that. So like some barrel making barrels is an art. It's a craft. It's not just, you can't industrially make barrels. You have to be a real sensitive carpenter to make them, because a good barrel, you won't have to use any nails. That's a good carpenter, I guess. But they do sometimes use horse glue and some other things to bind the staves of the barrel together, and that can come in contact with the wine. Also, if you're considering vegan status, if you let wine sit around long enough, the red pigment will settle at the bottom, and it'll be the water and the alcohol at the top, and so you'll have two hemispheres for your wine. So to prevent that from happening, they would use a suspension like egg white, very, very small amounts, and that would be enough to keep it buoyant. So that's another way. So.
I just didn't even know that was the option, that they ran it through a fish bladder. That
Oh, yeah.
was special.
Yeah. So mavushal versus non-mavushal. I drink non-mavushal because it's just yummier. It hasn't been zapped. And so this is the hechsher. The hechsher is basically a certification, a seal from a duly recognized rabbinic authority that possesses the expertise and bona fides to confer kosher status to food. The seal is earned by rabbinic supervision, oftentimes a mashgiach. A mashgiach is a supervisor who will supervise a factory and their protocols, so during the food preparation, that sort of thing. So anyway, so if you guys are interested in this kind of thing, and Parsha Shemini talks about this, so this is, I guess, a starting point. This is a fantastic book. It is very down to earth. It's very accessible. It explains the fundamentals of kosher foods. It explains how to kasher your kitchen in detail. It explains Passover kashrus. And it explains all three through the matrix of conservative, reform, and orthodox, depending on what level. I'm at a level, you're at a level, right? And it has very easy to follow instructions. What? So what? Oh, okay. Okay. Well, all right. And of course, we have the Atlanta Kashrus Commission. Whenever I was cashing my stove, I would reach out to Rubenstein, and he was very amenable to helping me out. I gave him money because I thought I should, and he said I shouldn't do that. But he made me like a member of the AKC for a year because I did, and so I felt really proud, like I'm a member of the AKC. I don't know anything about this, but yeah. So UMJC stance on this, the MJRC stance. The MJRC is the rabbinical council, I think, at the UMJC, if I'm going to have that right. So shechita and removal of blood. They tend to take a very lax approach because they realize that, people are where they're at. So the most basic biblical dietary law addressed not only to Israel, but also the nations, is not eating blood. In the world of Noah, it involves avoiding the eating of blood, foods that are cooked in or with blood. Concern to guard this is core dietary law led to the institution of shechita, the Jewish ritual slaughter of animals, which removes the vast majority of blood, and the special preparation of meat, which removes the remainder. Therefore, ideally, it is recommended that only meat slaughtered and packaged under reliable kosher supervision is actually purchased. Now, they do give some allowances, saying sometimes you might be a distance away from any supermarket. I think, like what Tally, you live in Winder, so it's like you're not gonna eat, there's nothing kosher in Winder. Sorry. So it's like
that's why we're there.
Well, no. I mean, I'm just saying, general. Like you're not going to find a Tuckle Hill in Winder. It's just not.
No, listen. The guy that does the pita bread, he has a bakery in Winder, and he delivers to the restaurant. That's kosher.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yes.
okay, all right. No, I'm just saying, just generally, Jews have historically been a city folk, and so it's sometimes harder especially if you're kind of out in the country to find kosher meats. So
and I got my kosher wine in the liquor store. They
yeah, exactly. It keeps forever.
They know me over there.
yeah. So separating of meat and dairy. MJRC says our basic practice involves avoiding the consumption of meat products, including fowl, and obvious dairy products. It puts the obvious there. So they're saying basically that if there's some minuscule amount of dairy in their food products that you wouldn't necessarily see, or it's not obviously a dairy product, even though it might be used as a hidden filler. So they would say they're only focusing on the obvious dairy products, is my point. Together, in a given meal, you shouldn't have those. Meat may be eaten after eating obvious dairy foods without any time interval, though there should not be present together at the same table. After eating a meat meal, the minimum time interval before eating obvious dairy products should be an hour. 6 hours is the orthodox, yeah. So my point is they're trying to make concessions. What was funny on the MJRC website is they had made this concession whereby they said, we understand that sometimes people come home late at work in the wintertime, and so we'll let you move the candle lighting back a little bit, into the darkness, which but you will keep that kidney out. It's kind of funny, It's just, eating in restaurants. When eating out, the above standard may be relaxed. The standards may be relaxed, but one should continue to avoid eating all meat products from non-kosher animals, pig, shellfish. Beyond this basic practice, we recommend eating of non-meat meals. That's what I do essentially. Fish, eggs, dairy. When eating in non-kosher facilities, it's still technically not kosher because it's probably cooked on a tray surface. But if you want to have some modicum of observance, have that. So.
Are going to eat out
Chinese
sushi. Sushi, if it's because it's cold.
Yes.
It takes heat to transfer.
Tuma. It takes heat to transfer tuma. That's correct. That's true. That's correct. It's cold. Good catch. So. What's funny?
They still have to cut it on a cutting board, right?
Yeah. Heat typically is a vehicle for transferring tuma from one unclean food to a clean food, and so what he's saying is technically correct. So.
It's more acceptable than other places.
Yeah, exactly. All wines or other alcoholic beverages are acceptable. In the case of Jewish ceremonies, however, only kosher wine, Passover, Kiddush, that sort of thing. So, Ed, you're pointing, you're raising your hand.
No, I'm just thinking out loud. I was talking to Tally. I was seeing you said UMJC is what we're.
I think MJRC is the branch of.
Messianic Jewish.
Yeah.
Okay.
Council,
What's the
So MJRC is like they deal with standards and that sort of thing, and so I just pulled this off their website shamelessly. Anyway, if you have any questions, I know I just kind of bombarded you with a lot. Okay, go ahead.
You used the word tuma. What is that?
Tuma. Tameh is the status of the Torah doesn't. The translations of the Torah do a bad job, but they often say unclean, but it basically means ritual impurity. So what? Defilement. And there's not always everything wrong with being tuma. So, for example, you're given a mitzvah to have children, but you have to become tuma to give birth. And that's totally fine. Or you have to bury your relative. So there's nothing inherently wrong with being tuma. It's when you're becoming a constant source of tuma for other people that you'd probably be called to account in antiquity. So there's tahor, which is pure, and tameh, which is impure. And tuma is sort of the noun form of the adjectival thing I just told you. So yeah.